Imagine a time before Hollywood had rules, before morality boards and censors dictated what could or could not haunt the screen. The pre-code era was a fever dream of madness, cruelty, and taboo where filmmakers dared to show what later decades buried. These were not just horror films, they were warnings from an untamed industry. Let us dive into the 13 most disturbing pre-code horror films ever made. Number 13. Freaks, 1932. Released by MGM, Freaks was unlike anything audiences had seen. It was meant to be a shock attraction, a carnival of the grotesque, yet it became one of the most haunting moral parables in cinema. The story followed real sideshow performers who sought revenge on those who mocked them. Audiences were horrified not by makeup, but by reality itself. When it premiered, censors went into full panic. One woman reportedly fainted, another threatened to sue. The studio cut nearly 30 minutes of footage, fearing backlash from religious groups and moral crusaders. MGM executives buried the film soon after calling it an embarrassment. In some states, it was outright banned. Behind the scenes, the cast faced cruel treatment from society, even during filming. Many of the performers were ridiculed by other studio workers. Todd Browning, the director who once made Dracula, saw his career collapse under the outrage. Decades later, Freaks returned from obscurity, rediscovered by underground audiences in the 1960s. Now, it is hailed as a masterpiece of empathy and horror, a mirror that dared to show how monstrous normality can be. Number 12. Island of Lost Souls, 1932. When Paramount released Island of Lost Souls, critics were stunned by its blasphemous tone. Based on H.G. Wells' The Island of Dr. Moreau, the film portrayed a mad scientist turning animals into humans. Charles Lawton's performance as Moreau was chilling, soft-spoken, yet godlike in cruelty. Audiences recoiled from its implications. The idea of man playing God was too much for the early 30s. Britain immediately banned it, labeling it morally revolting. Religious groups protested its message, calling it an affront to divine creation. Even the dialogue was considered obscene for daring to mention human evolution. Behind the camera, the set was a nightmare of heat and chaos. Real animal parts were used to decorate Moreau's laboratory. The actors under heavy makeup endured suffocating conditions that left some hospitalized. Though it vanished for decades, censored and cut beyond recognition, the film was rediscovered in near-complete form in the 1990s. Today, it stands as one of the most atmospheric and cruel depictions of scientific madness ever made, its whispers still echoing through every tale of hubris that followed. Number 11. The Black Cat, 1934. Universal Studios promised a stylish thriller, but what they unleashed was pure blasphemy wrapped in Art Deco horror. The Black Cat starred Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi in their most twisted collaboration. Beneath its surface of revenge and architecture hid a story of satanic ritual necrophilia and despair. Though loosely inspired by Edgar Allan Poe, the film was unlike any adaptation before or after. Its imagery of death altars, corpses preserved in glass, and human sacrifice went far beyond what audiences were prepared for. Even the lighting suggested a perverse aesthetic beauty in evil. Censors tore into the film. Several countries banned it for its references to cult worship. In America, some theaters refused to show it, calling it unholy and psychologically damaging. Director Edgar Ulmer was blacklisted from major studios afterward, forced into low-budget exile despite his visual genius. The movie was too bold, too modern, too dangerous for the age. Today, The Black Cat is remembered as a stunning descent into artistic madness, a bridge between gothic horror and psychological terror. It was proof that before censorship, horror dared to be both beautiful and unbearable. Number 10. Murders in the Zoo, 1933. Paramount marketed Murders in the Zoo as a thrilling adventure, but what audiences witnessed was something far darker. From its shocking opening scene where a man's mouth is sewn shut to its scenes of animal violence and insanity, it was the kind of film that left early audiences in stunned silence. Lionel Atwill played Eric Gorman, a wealthy zoologist whose jealousy drove him to use wild beasts as his instruments of revenge. He fed victims to crocodiles and strangled rivals with snakes. It was theatrical brutality made to look eerily real. Censors were horrified. The Hays office tried to stop its release, but Paramount rushed it to theaters before stricter enforcement could intervene. Newspapers condemned it as depraved and inhumane, while religious groups demanded it be pulled from circulation. Some theaters even refused to display its posters, calling them offensive to decency. Behind the scenes, real animals were used, and handlers often risked injury. Actress Kathleen Burke recalled the terror of filming near lions without barriers. The director insisted on realism, and the result felt almost documentary in its cruelty. For decades, Murders in the Zoo was forgotten, buried beneath studio shame. When it resurfaced, critics hailed it as a rare window into the darkest corners of pre-code imagination. Its message still echoes: power can turn even intellect into monstrosity when no moral cage is left intact. Number 9. The Mask of Fu Manchu, 1932. When MGM unveiled The Mask of Fu Manchu, it was meant to be an exotic adventure, but what it delivered was a nightmare of racial anxiety and sadistic fantasy. Boris Karloff's Fu Manchu was not just a villain, he was a demonic symbol of cultural fear. The film's depiction of torture and domination shocked even hardened audiences. Fu Manchu sought to reclaim the world for the East by conquering Western science, used electricity whips and psychological torment to break his captives. Audiences gasped at the sight of his underground temple and sacrificial rituals. But the controversy went far beyond horror. The Chinese government formally protested the film's racism, and the British Board of Film Censors banned it outright. American newspapers accused MGM of spreading hate during a fragile political moment. Behind the camera, MGM executives panicked as word spread. Lines were cut, scenes were reshot, and even so, the film was nearly withdrawn. Still, its cruelty remained intact. Over time, The Mask of Fu Manchu became infamous not for its thrills, but for how it revealed the ugliness of cultural paranoia. It is a film both cursed and revered, proof that horror often hides behind the mask of fear itself. Number 8. Dr. X, 1932. Dr. X was Warner Bros.' first film shot in two-strip Technicolor, yet its beauty only made its horror more unsettling. Audiences expected a scientific mystery. What they got was a grotesque parade of murder and cannibalism, cloaked in eerie colors. The plot followed a series of killings traced to a medical research institute where each doctor was a potential madman. The climax revealed the killer to be a scientist, experimenting on human flesh under moonlight. The sight of melting skin and synthetic limbs made audiences recoil in disbelief. Religious leaders condemned the film immediately. Critics said it glamorized science gone mad. In some states, prints were seized and edited beyond recognition. Behind the scenes, director Michael Curtiz pushed the limits of the new color process. The makeup effects designed for black and white appeared more revolting under the sickly pink and green hues of early Technicolor. The film's surreal glow made everything feel like a fever dream. For decades, it vanished from circulation until a restored version emerged, revealing details that censorship had erased. Today, Dr. X stands as a dazzling contradiction, a film that combined beauty with decay and dared to let horror gleam in unnatural color before Hollywood demanded everything return to black and white. Number 7. The Most Dangerous Game, 1932. RKO. Pictures released The Most Dangerous Game as an adventure thriller, but what they hid beneath its title was one of the earliest depictions of human hunting on film. Directed by Ernest Schoedsack and Irving Pichel, the same team behind King Kong, it followed a shipwrecked hunter who finds himself trapped on an island where the host hunts people for sport. At first, the studio promoted it as an action picture, but audiences were horrified by its implications. The villain, Count Zaroff, was a refined aristocrat whose pleasure came from tracking human prey through a fog-drenched jungle. Every arrow, every scream felt like a reflection of civilization's cruelty. Censors objected to nearly everything from the suggestive violence to the eerie undertone of psychological control. Religious boards in multiple states called it immoral for implying that man could find joy in killing his own kind. The British censors demanded major cuts before allowing its release. The film's set was drenched in danger. The same jungle and cliffs used for King Kong were reused here, but the night shoots were treacherous, and actors frequently slipped or were injured. Fay Wray, who would later scream her way through Kong, was genuinely terrified filming in the darkness. When the film resurfaced decades later, critics recognized its brilliance. It was more than just a thriller. It was a parable about privilege, the madness of power, and the thin line separating hunter from hunted. Even today, its echoes can be felt in countless survival horror films that followed. Number 6. The Raven, 1935. Universal's The Raven came near the end of the pre-code storm and was one of the final gasps before the censors tightened the noose completely. It paired Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi in a tale of surgical horror obsession and sadism that terrified critics and nearly destroyed careers. Lugosi played Dr. Richard Vallon, a brilliant surgeon obsessed with Edgar Allan Poe. He transforms his mansion into a torture chamber, inspired by Poe's stories, complete with swinging blades and shrinking walls. When a criminal played by Karloff is disfigured and forced into murder, the result is both gothic and grotesque. Audiences were not ready. The British Board of Film Censors banned it immediately, calling it morbid and inhuman. In America, many theaters refused to screen it, fearing parental outrage. Critics labeled it a disgrace to the profession of medicine. Behind the camera, the production was fraught with tension. Karloff and Lugosi clashed over billing, while Universal executives worried the film would draw government scrutiny. Their fears proved correct, and soon after its release, the studio was warned that such horrors would no longer be tolerated. The Raven vanished from major circulation until horror revivalists rediscovered it in the 1960s. It remains one of the most visually stylish depictions of madness ever made, a final scream from an era where no nightmare was too extreme to film. Number 5. White Zombie, 1932. Often cited as the first true zombie movie, White Zombie was both mystical and morbid, a tale of love, death, and control set in the misty plantations of Haiti. Bela Lugosi starred as Murder Legendre, a sorcerer who enslaved men and women to serve as lifeless workers. At first, audiences were entranced by its exotic setting and haunting imagery, but soon critics recoiled from its depiction of voodoo and its undertone of spiritual enslavement. The film's atmosphere of hypnosis and submission struck too close to colonial fear. Religious groups condemned it as unholy. The New York Board of Censors demanded scenes be shortened, including one where a woman was shown in a trance between life and death. The word zombie itself became controversial. In England, the film was banned for a decade. Behind the scenes, the production was rushed and chaotic, filmed on leftover sets from Universal's Dracula and Frankenstein. The crew worked in extreme heat on limited budgets, yet what emerged was a hypnotic dream of shadow and decay. Though critics dismissed it as lurid pulp, it grew into legend. Decades later, scholars called it the birth of cinematic voodoo, a film that replaced monsters with mindless obedience. Its legacy runs through every modern zombie story, reminding us that the most terrifying horror is to lose one's will entirely. Number 4. Mad Love, 1935. When Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer released Mad Love, it shocked even seasoned moviegoers. Peter Lorre, in his American debut, delivered one of the most unsettling performances of the pre-code era. He played Dr. Gogol, a surgeon so obsessed with a beautiful actress that he grafts the hands of a murderer onto her injured husband. What followed was a fever dream of obsession madness and surgical horror. The film was promoted as psychological suspense, but what appeared on screen felt more like forbidden anatomy. Audiences were disturbed by the sight of living flesh being reassembled. Critics accused it of crossing into blasphemy. Religious organizations demanded it be withdrawn, citing its lack of moral restraint. Censors in Britain banned the film outright. The Canadian board called it unfit for civilized viewing. Even American theaters trimmed entire scenes involving the operating table. Despite this, MGM resisted total suppression, arguing that art could portray insanity without endorsing it. Behind the scenes, Lorre's performance disturbed the cast. He shaved his head, wore exaggerated makeup, and stayed in character between takes. Actress Frances Drake reportedly wept during one of his monologues, calling it too real to bear. Director Karl Freund himself, a veteran of German Expressionism, brought the same shadow-drenched terror he had once used in The Mummy. Mad Love was a box office failure, but it became a cornerstone of psychological horror, influencing everything from film noir to modern thrillers. It proved that before censorship, horror dared to gaze not at monsters, but into the mind of obsession itself. Number 3. Murders in the Rue Morgue, 1932. Universal's Murders in the Rue Morgue was meant to capitalize on the success of Dracula, but what it produced was something far stranger. Bela Lugosi's portrayal of Dr. Miracle, a scientist who kidnaps women for blood experiments, terrified audiences and scandalized censors. The film's mixture of pseudoscience and abduction was too provocative for the early 30s. Its dark streets, its gaslit laboratories, and its brutal experiments pushed the limits of what could be shown. Even the climactic scene where Miracle attempts to inject ape blood into a woman was enough to cause walkouts. Critics described it as grotesque, immoral, and blasphemous. The British censors banned it immediately. American cities trimmed or removed entire sequences. Universal executives panicked, cutting nearly 20 minutes before general release, yet the film remained too shocking for many audiences. Behind the camera, director Robert Florey drew from German Expressionism painting sets in distorted geometry to mirror insanity. Lugosi relished the role, but the backlash damaged his reputation and made studios wary of employing him in anything beyond caricature. Though it vanished for decades, historians later recognized it as a masterpiece of early horror atmosphere. Its eerie carnival scenes and violent experimentation would inspire generations of mad scientist tales. Murders in the Rue Morgue stands as a relic of terror, unbound a film that taught studios how far was too far. Number 2. The Old Dark House, 1932. Before James Whale made The Invisible Man and Bride of Frankenstein, he crafted one of the strangest haunted house films ever shot. The Old Dark House combined gothic comedy with existential horror, creating a mood so bleak it unsettled even hardened critics. The story followed a group of travelers stranded during a storm who take refuge in a crumbling mansion owned by the eccentric Femme family. What begins as quirky soon dissolves into dread. Each family member harbors madness and decay. One is pyromaniacal, another believes he talks to ghosts. The patriarch remains locked in a distant room never seen until the end. Audiences were divided. Some admired its wit, others fled the theater in confusion. The mixture of humor and terror was unprecedented. The British Board of Film Censors banned it temporarily for promoting despair. American religious groups condemned it for mocking family values. Behind the scenes, Whale encouraged improvisation and psychological realism. Actor Boris Karloff, who played the hulking butler Morgan, terrified extras with his unpredictable movements. During production power outages and flooding, added eerie authenticity. The Old Dark House was pulled from circulation for decades after Universal lost the rights. It resurfaced in the 1960s, restored by film historian Curtis Harrington. Today, it is hailed as a masterpiece of atmosphere and tone, a film that laughed in the face of propriety and found beauty in decay. Number 1. The Mummy, 1932. When Universal released The Mummy, audiences expected another monster spectacle after Frankenstein. What they got was something eerier, slower, and infinitely more disturbing. Boris Karloff, shrouded in ancient bandages, gave one of cinema's most chillingly restrained performances. His Imhotep wasn't a creature of brute terror, he was a man resurrected by forbidden ritual, consumed by immortal obsession. What terrified 1930s audiences wasn't the makeup or the tombs, it was the idea of ancient curses defying Christian morality. The film's opening, where an archaeologist reads the Scroll of Thoth aloud and unknowingly brings a mummy to life, was condemned by religious leaders as sacrilegious. Newspapers decried its evil fascination with death. In Britain and parts of Canada, censors trimmed scenes they deemed unfit for civilized viewing. Behind the scenes, Karloff endured hours of excruciating makeup by Jack Pierce, whose techniques bordered on torture. Layers of gauze and gum hardened to his skin until he could barely breathe. Director Karl Freund, a veteran of German Expressionism, insisted on near-silent takes, creating an atmosphere of sacred dread. Though The Mummy was promoted as a monster movie, it was really a story about eternal love twisted into necromantic obsession, a reflection of how desire itself can defy death. Critics later called it the most spiritually unclean of Universal's early horrors. Today, it stands as the perfect symbol of the pre-code era, where horror wasn't just about monsters, but about the sins we dared to awaken. Before censorship shackled imagination, these filmmakers dared to explore the forbidden corners of human nature. Their stories were shocking because they were honest reflections of fear and desire. So which of these pre-code horrors still chills you today? Let us know in the comments and subscribe for more journeys into cinema's untamed past where the real monsters wore no masks.